Termo to Madeline, Audio Edition, page 121, chapter title, Elmer Van Loan's First Stage Lines. Shortly after the NCO Railroad arrived at Amity, Elmer Van Loan began operation on the Amity to Alturas stage line. Passengers were met at the Amity Hotel on the morning after the train arrived. The driver would see that his passengers were properly loaded and then coax his horses into a fast trot. If the weather was good and the roads were not in too bad of shape, the riders would be enjoying a meal and night's rest at Van Loan's big, comfortable, two-story house at the Van Loan stage station that evening. The Van Loan stage horses were some of the finest trotters to be found. On the way up the long, rocky pull onto the plains, stops were made at the McKissick stage station in Secret Valley and at Penning's stage station at Spanish Springs to change horses. Hostlers at these stations generally had the tired, sweaty horses traded for fresh, anxious ones within 10 minutes' time, and the stage would be on its way again. Generally, there was a short stopover at the McKissicks for a hot noon meal. The next morning, after reaching the Van Loan stage station, a fresh team would start out and carry the travelers on to Alturas. Stops would be made at the Smith station on the far side of Sage Hen Flat, and once or twice at stations along the South Fork to change horses. Thus, within 2 days after leaving Amity, the travelers would be in Alturas. Therefore, if they were going on north, they could catch the Lakeview Paisley stage. These were the conditions the traveler experienced, and the weather was good, and the roads were in fair shape being the absolute best conditions the roads could be in. It was a steep, rocky, miserable, rough ride coming out of Secret Valley onto the plains at best. And of course, for the travelers going the other way, the same unhospitable conditions applied, coming out of South Fork Valley, across Dry Creek Canyon onto Sage Hen Flat. This left the passengers jolted, sore, and well shaken when they stopped for the night. If the weather was bad and the wind blowing, as it usually was, one could get so cold sitting immobile on the hard canvas-covered horsehair cushioned seats that tears came to the eyes. On days like that, which were many, it was often necessary to stop every few miles. The driver and passengers would crawl down out of the coach, build a fire, and get their circulation going before starting out once again. If the roads were muddy or icy, the spirited stage team were lucky to pull their load, let alone do it at a trot. Stages faltered and slid into crevices and off side of the hills. Horses slipped and fell, and the constant jolting over rocks was far harder on the horses than it was the people. But what took the worst beating was the stage itself. Wagon tires came loose from the wheels, hubs became worn and would give out. Spokes would snap, and various parts of the running gear would break. More than once, passengers were left stranded and had to walk to the next station or the closest ranch to where the breakdown occurred. Now, on those kind of days, even if the traveler was lucky and did not have to walk, the trip could simply not be made that quickly. All of the stage stops were well equipped to house and feed passengers, and more than once was the time the Pinos, Brockmans, and others along the route fed travelers and put them up for the night. Staying the night at one of the early day stage stops was an experience itself. The best part was the hot, home-cooked meals, generally always provided and prepared by the wife of the stage owner. A meal was usually consisted of meat and potatoes and gravy, beans and a hot biscuit, topped off by a huge slice of apple pie or some other sort of pastry. This could be had for 25 cents. The travelers left the table well fed, and the little lady made good money at that. Upstairs there were always lots of beds, but there were often more boarders. If one was traveling alone, he usually had to share a bed with one or more freight teamsters or travelers on one of the other stage lines. The lady travelers always got their choice of the best beds, and the men took what was left over, sometimes a pile of hay in the barn. At that time, there were stage routes all over. Elmer Van Loan just took care of the traffic between the two towns of Amity and Alturas. John Smith and his oldest son, Art, were operating a stage line between Amity and Smoke Creek. There was a Surprise Valley run that went from Amity to Spanish Springs and then out across the east side of the plains to the Moulton stage station at Red Rock and on up through Tuladad into Eagleville. There was a bunch off the Alturas Lakeview stage line that went over Fandango Pass into Fort Bidwell. And there was a line that ran from Amity into Susanville and out through Willow Creek Valley and Grasshopper Valley to Hayden Hill, Ayden, and Bieber. When the NCO moved up to Termo, it became closer to travel direct to Big Valley from there, so Elmer Van Loan opened up the Bieber, Ayden, Hayden Hill, and Termo run. John Williams started work with a road crew in opening up a new country road between Ayden and Van Loan Station in March of 1900. Van Loan's Bieber Ash Valley Termo line began operation on September 1st, 1900. Van Loan had been running what was generally called mud wagons on his stage lines. These were heavy-duty coaches, actually little more than freight wagons with thorough braces, which kept the passengers and horses from being jolted into insensibility. With the railhead at Termo, and shortly thereafter at Madeline, the runs to Alturas were not so long and drawn out, so Van Loan put his heavy-duty mountain mud wagons on the Ayden Bieber run, and obtained a lighter version of the mud wagon for the Alturas line. These coaches were known as Celerity wagons. They could actually carry more passengers than the mud wagons. They had more seating space and they could support under hard use, however, so, when overloaded, they were extremely rough riding. Second, in severity only to a dead axle wagon, they did have light leather thorough braces, and when loaded lightly, as designed, they were relatively smooth riding. They served their purpose well, however, and made for fast trips down the mountain to Alturas or up the mountain to Madeline and Termo. All of the coaches operated by Elmer Van Loan had the typical luggage racks on the top above the passengers' heads and the compartment in the rear for more luggage or whatever was being hauled. There were canvas curtains on the sides, which could be rolled up and tied at the top in good weather, or let down to keep out the dust and cold. It was not until 1905, when most of the stage lines in the West were going, or had gone, out of business, that he obtained some second-hand Concord-style coaches. These were the plush coaches, totally boxed in with paneled doors, that one sees in the movies today. These were supreme in the design of their thorough braces and noticeably easier on teams and passengers alike. They swayed rather than jounced. At that time it became a real treat to ride the Madeline to Alturas stage. Drivers of the Van Loan stages carried anything from passengers and luggage to mail to gold bars from Hayden Hill. The gold was brought in a strong box from the mines at Hayden Hill to be shipped out on the NCO at Termo and later Madeline. Ward West was a tremendous teamster, but Van Loan possibly could have found a better driver on the Beaver Run. Ward was a little nervous guy whose excitability did not improve after one of the stages carried gold bullion was held up near Aden. Teamsters and freighters generally marked bad spots in the road by setting a post at a slant where the problem area was. Then they would char one side of its side to stay back away from the spot. It was snowing pretty heavily one day after John Williams had just put some new marker posts out. Ward West came around a turn on the hill above Ash Valley, and recently holed up fresh in his mind, he saw the marker post through the driving snow and just knew that a highwayman had had him. He whipped his 4-horse team into a gallop and threw down the strong box. When he and his sweat-drenched horses charged into Madeline, a posse was sent out to do some tracking before the snow covered the tracks. All they found was a strong box by a lone marker post on the side of the road. Ward West never lived that one down. There were other stage drivers besides Ward West, lots of them. Some of those who are best remembered are Bert Pratt, Omi Harmelsey, Billy Drain, and Jeff Kelly. Kelly is remembered most for his kindness to children. He was an old man who loved the little ones. Almost every trip he made between Termo and Alturas, he would carry a letter in his pocket from Lily Van Loan to Bertha Smith. On his way back, he would pick up little Bertha's letter and lovingly deliver it to little Lily. And there were more horses than the 4 that Ward West was driving at the embarrassing moment so many years ago. The stages were generally pulled by 4 horses, each of which had a name and was spoken to individually by the drivers. 6 horses would be put on the coaches to pull the hill or wallow through the mud and snow in bad weather. And they were changed at each station every 10 or 20 miles, depending on the terrain that they were covering. Between the stage and freight horses, Elmer Van Loan's son and hired men had anywhere from 50 to 60 horses to feed at night, except in the dead of winter. Then, if the snow was bad, they often had a lot more than that to feed every day. When the snow got bad in the winter and the stages had to be shut down, the mails still had to be carried, and Van Loan had a large string of pack horses for just that purpose. And there were a few winters when even pack animals could not make it for weeks at a time. The mail went out on snowshoes and skis those times. Once the NCO railhead was at Madeline, the Van Loan stage station lost its significance as both a stage stop and a freighting stop. But Van Loan built a hotel and livery stables in town and operated his stage from there. By that time, his oldest son, Dolph, was driving the Madeline to Alturas, run a big percentage of that time, except in the dead of winter. The stage ran at night. The train would pull into Madeline at 7:30 in the evening. The passengers would go over to the hotel for supper, and after taking on a few shots of antifreeze at the bar, would load up at 9 o'clock for the run to Alturas. Another coach would pick up the travelers from Alturas and those who would come in on the Lakeview line and have them in Madeline in time to meet the 7:15 down train in the morning. In the winter, of course, the schedules had to be changed. The travelers would spend a night in the hotel before going on to Alturas or catching the train. This was due to the fact that it was, at the very best, a 7-hour run in the daylight between Madeline and Alturas in bad weather and under the poor road conditions. Elmer Van Loan retired from the operation of stage lines in July of 1906. The NCO was building new tracks on into Likely, and the days of the Madeline to Alturas stage were numbered. He sold the line to an outfit by the name of Cross and Harder. They operated the line The NCO started full service to Likely on October 1st, 1907. Roy Williams operated the Madeline to Beaver stage for several years, and finally his brother George took it over for him. Devon Olson was the last driver on that route. By that time, a team of horses pulled a coach over the line in the winter and was run in a Model A in the summer. Next chapter, titled George Bailey, Master Builder, page 126.